Today we're diving into this concept of emotional reactivity, or you could call it stress response. And this is really the stuff that matters, when it comes to understanding how your mind works and really evolving your psychology, because all of us have this experience of getting our stress response triggered. And, the joke is kind of on us because evolutionarily, we evolved at a time when humans were subject to mortal peril on almost a continuous basis. There's almost always a saber-toothed tiger or something else over your shoulder that you genuinely had to be able to react instantly and decisively. And fortunately, for many of us, we are not in that same kind of peril on a continuous basis. Although it is also important to say that for some of us, truly that stress response is life-saving, and that we don't want to turn it off, but we want to tame it. And that is really what we're going to talk about today. How do we understand what's going on for us when we get that flood of fight or flight or freeze, hormones surging through our body, and we almost we're not even thinking consciously about what we're doing? How do we master that? How do we tame that? How do we channel that so that it shows up in healthy ways when we need it, and that it's not happening continually for us? And for me, this has been a huge part of my own journey. I probably went, easily 20 years of my life where I kind of lived in a continuous state of low-level fear or anxiety, you could call it. And not that there was necessarily any real good reason for that. That's just kind of the pattern that I had established. And the cost, for me was really tremendous in terms of my sense of fulfillment and joy. It was actually, in many ways, a functional way to exist in terms of getting things done in the world. But I didn't enjoy it, and ultimately, it's not sustainable. And for all of us who have this calling to make the world a better place, if we're powering that calling with anxiety and fear and that kind of energy, it leads us into that loop. And we've talked about this. This kind of loop of the 6 things that get in our way: confusion, procrastination, exhaustion. Then we get anger, sadness, and then kind of self-absorption and tunnel vision. And we can just cycle around in that if we're in this state of anxiety. So what I want to do today is really work on this fundamental component, the idea that we have 2 ways of dealing with the world. We have a system 1 brain that you could think of as like our fight or flight brain. And we have a system 2 brain, which is our higher level faculties, our ability to reason and analyze and kind of logically solve problems. And, that system 1 brain, in order to work, has to be instinctive. It has to trigger immediately. But the problem with it is that it's always switched on because it's ever vigilant, looking for those saber-toothed tigers. So that if you ever drop a knife, and your foot is in the way, you'll pull your foot back before you even think about it. We need our system 1 brain to work like that. But what we don't want it to do is to be overriding our higher level faculties and kind of flooding us with that stress response because we checked our email and something seemed dangerous to us in our email. That we need to kind of have a sense of proportionality in order to live our lives with any degree of joy and fulfillment in the modern world. And so the first question to ask here, there's a worksheet that goes along with this, is how often do you find yourself in a state of reactive emotional activation? For some of us, it might literally be like sweaty palms, your pulse gets elevated, you feel butterflies in your stomach, or you find yourself acting without consciously even knowing that you're doing it. A great example of this might be, if you're driving in traffic, right, and someone cuts you off, you react immediately. And then for like a minute or 2 afterwards, you can just feel those chemicals working their way through your body. Whatever it was that took over, flooded you with adrenaline and the other stress hormones, you can actually feel that you're physiologically altered. So it can actually be helpful to keep a little record of this. Do you actually experience that level of activation? How often does that actually happen for you? If you're fortunate, it's only going to happen when you have some unexpected life-threatening thing like someone cutting you off in traffic. But unfortunately, if you're not feeling safe in your home, or there are other circumstances in your life that are causing you to elevate to that level on a regular basis, that's something to really kind of understand what your baseline is, what you're working from. And then you want to take a look at, like, are there situations that keep recurring that aren't random, like someone cutting you off in traffic, but that are actually regular features of your circumstances that typically trigger your stress response? And granted, that full bore, sweaty palms, racing heart, that may not happen that often, but you might want to then be thinking, are there lower level stress responses that are kicking in more frequently? For example, when you go to open your email first thing in the morning, do you have this feeling in the pit of your stomach? Do you feel a little sense of dread, when you see someone's name pop up in your inbox or something like that? Those are other examples, maybe at a lower level, but is there a pattern for you? You want to look for these types of patterns. And, one of the classic things in cognitive behavioral therapy is keeping records, right? So you can sort of look for patterns of things that may be causing your stress response to trigger, because we'll get to this a little later on. Understanding those patterns gives you some opportunity to make adjustments. And another thing to think about is just when you do get triggered, what is your typical response? Is it fight, which, some sort of opposition? Is it flight, like retreating? Or is it freezing and literally, getting sort of stuck in a way of not taking action one way or the other? And, it's valuable to think about how you respond to stress in this way, because sometimes we don't think about it as a stress response. Going back to this idea of these different things, sometimes anger may be your fight response, right? Sadness might be your flight response to stress. And feeling confused might be your freeze response. And so sometimes we're having feelings in our lives that we're not sure, like, why we're feeling that way. It is worth trying to understand, is there a stimulus that I can trace back and understand this feeling in the context of something external that's happened to me? But it's also important to say, and I know I'm jumping around this worksheet, there's a bunch of graphics I keep flashing through, but let me just walk through this a little bit, what your stress reaction pathway actually is. So some external event happens. Someone cuts you off in traffic. It immediately goes to your system 1 brain, which immediately then says, okay, big danger. This is a life-threatening emergency. We're going straight to action. You have this sort of emotion. You feel like you need to meet your basic needs for security, survival, and so you go immediately to action. You don't engage this whole system 2 side of your brain at all. It just happens just like that. What we're playing for, if we want to get out of a stress response, if we feel like we're actually having a stress response in a situation that's not life-threatening, where it's not appropriate to get triggered to that level, you want to figure out how to make this system 2 brain here, in effect, get bigger in that moment, and actually engage your beliefs, your thoughts, your critical faculties to a reasoned response, and then a thoughtful plan of action, and finally taking action after that. So that's what we're playing for. The other thing to think about here is how long does it take you to get back sort of on an even keel after you have a stress response? And obviously that depends to a degree on how severe the response was. But one of the things that you really want to think about is, like, what tools do you have that help you calm yourself if you do experience that stress response? And there's something really powerful that I think many of us don't think about in this regard. And of course, if you're doing some mindfulness work, you're probably already aware of this. But your breathing is really a unique system in your body, in that it is the one system in your body that is both consciously and unconsciously controlled, right? The vast majority of us cannot control the rate of our heartbeat simply through our mind. We can, however, control the rate of our breathing. And yet, if you don't think about breathing, you'll continue to breathe, right? You breathe in your sleep. And so it's a system that works both automatically and through our thoughts. And so if you deliberately, as a way to calm down, begin to breathe slowly, for example, take deep diaphragmatic breaths, so breathing in through your nose and let your belly expand, and then slowly let that breath out. So if you can slow down to maybe 5, 6, or even 4 breaths per minute, so sort of breathing in for 6 or 7 seconds, pausing for a second, and then breathing out just a little bit longer, like 7 or 8 seconds. Do that 4 times, that's a minute. There's amazing research about how much that changes your whole sort of internal chemistry just by consciously altering your breath. So that's a great way in the moment to kind of switch out of that stress response and begin to calm yourself down. So that's the question 4 on this worksheet. What typically has to happen in order for you to be able to calm down and return to normal? And if you can use your breath as a conscious device there, you can give yourself a faster recovery. The next question is, are there things you can do? Now we're talking about how could we avoid getting our stress response triggered unnecessarily in the first place. And this is where you want to kind of put an engineer's mindset to work. Are there things going on in your life that, if you start recording the instances when you really get triggered in a stress response, you're probably going to find some patterns. And if you find patterns, then what can you do about them? Is there any element of that pattern that you can control? I shared in the previous session this story about how, when I was trying to get my then 4-year-old son to church, I would get all frazzled because he didn't want to put his shoes on. There was a pattern there. I could find that pattern and I could see my stress response was getting triggered. Okay, now I can re-engineer my morning and actually make sure that we have a little extra time, or I do that transition in a little bit different way and avoid that situation. So that's the first thing you want to think about. Like, is there something you can do that you can control actually? So you're not relying on someone else's behavior, but you're really showing up yourself in a different way or changing your environment in some way. So that's really worth reflecting on. When you find your pattern for stress, what can you do to alter that pattern that's under your own control? Another really key thing to think about is there a daily practice or routine that you can adopt that's going to shift the way that you're feeling? And for this, I want to show you this idea, in cognitive behavioral therapy, there's a classic CBT triangle, it's called. And the idea is that your conscious state of mind in any given moment is actually determined by 3 things: your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions or your physical body. And when you're experiencing a stress response, the same thing is true. That sensation of stress is rooted in your thoughts, your feelings, and your physical actions. A lot of times we interpret the stress as coming from this external event. We can't control the external event once it's actually happening, but we can control our thoughts and our actions, and that in turn will shape our feelings. A lot of times we think, oh, I'm feeling this stress, I can't do anything about that, or the only thing I can do about it is stop this event from happening. Well, we just explored that avenue in the previous question, right? Maybe you can stop the event from happening. If so, go do that. But if it's an event that's going to happen regardless, and it's something you just have to deal with, then your agency really is around your thoughts and also your actions. And so you want to ask yourself, what change can I make in the way I'm thinking about this situation or the actions that I'm taking in the moment? And even going back before the moment, one of the most powerful actions that you can take, and we've talked about this before, is actually this practice of mindfulness and meditation. Because meditation is like continuous practice in bringing your focus back to whatever you want it to be on. So when you're meditating, you can bring your focus back to, if you're repeating a mantra or something like that, it's a workout for your brain to bring your focus back. And it can be very powerful when you get triggered in a stress response to give you that split second to think about what response do I want to have here? And can I engage my system 2 here and choose a different response rather than just following the red lines and kind of mindlessly pursuing this stress response? And so for me, mindfulness practice on a daily basis has been phenomenal in clearing out kind of underlying anxiety and fear and allowing me in the moment to have more agency about what I choose to do. And I think it's also worth saying that, in addition to kind of that mindfulness practice in your life, you want to be thinking what that does is it actually gives you the opportunity to examine your thoughts in the moment, right? So going back, the action you can take sometimes is perhaps it's breathing, shift your breathing in the moment. That might help you. But then can you examine your thoughts and figure out, is there something in my thought pattern here that's contributing to my sense of stress? And this is, again, a classic aspect of cognitive behavioral therapy. It's something that people like Byron Katie with the work, talk about a lot. So there's, whatever you want to call it, this idea that we actually do have control over what we think. And you want to get in the habit of questioning your thoughts. And in Byron Katie's book, The Work, she has these 4 questions. Really, they're 5. And the first is this thought true? Well, okay. Ask yourself that in the moment. And then, how do I know that it's true? And so, for example, this might be, you see an email that's upsetting. Well, examine, like, why is it upsetting? And usually it's because you think something bad is going to happen because of this email. Well, is that true? How do you know it's true is question 2. And then what happens when I believe this is true? When I believe that this email is going to be calamitous, when I'm catastrophizing about what might happen because someone sent me this email. And then who would you be if you didn't have this thought, if you didn't believe that this was going to be calamitous, if you sort of were able to say, 20 years from now, when I look back on this, I'm not even going to remember this, right? And then what happens if I turn this thought around and believe the opposite? So instead of getting this email leading to some calamity in my life, what if this is an incredible opportunity? So you just want to question your thoughts. And that, Byron Katie's observation is that when I sort of mindlessly believe my thoughts, I end up not feeling joy. I end up not in a happy place. It's not that your thoughts are always wrong. It's just you want to have a critical faculty. You want to engage your system 2 brain to question your thoughts when they're leading you into a stress response that is way out of proportion to the actual circumstance. So another way to think about this, and Brian Johnson at optimize.me has a great set of, he calls them 101 or courses almost, where he distills wisdom from ancient philosophers up to modern science. And he sort of actually has an anxiety, I think it's Conquering Anxiety 101 is the course that he does on this. I recommend that as well. But there's also this idea that you don't want to get caught in rumination, right? That you want to get out of these loops where your thoughts and your feelings are kind of conspiring to hold you in place. And the next question on this worksheet is really around that idea that, are there thought patterns that are kind of like your personal kryptonite, that you get caught in this thought pattern and it just aggravates your stress response? So for example, one pattern could be like focusing on other people's achievements, like scrolling through social media and then you start feeling bad about yourself. And, that's something you can break by simply breaking that habit, but also not comparing yourself to other people, like just sort of setting up a rule for yourself, like, hey, that's not a thought path I want to go down. Another one might be to just focus on stuff you can't control, whether it's other people's behavior or external events. And if you focus continuously on those things you can't control as the source of your challenge, then you kind of can get stuck in this feeling of anger or sadness, because you're that loop of anger and sadness where you just feel like you're not in control of your own circumstances. Other people keep doing things or bad things keep happening to you. And you can really get stuck in that place. Another possible kryptonite might be to focus on achieving outcomes rather than on the process of taking action that you need to achieve those outcomes. I know that seems like a bit of a nuance, but if you're really goal-oriented and you're totally sweating whether you're going to achieve something or not, that actually can cause you to get stuck, to procrastinate. Whereas, and we talked about this actually in another session, this idea of creating action chains and really distilling like what is your mission maximizing output. Not actually the goal itself. You want to focus on the leading indicators of achievement, meaning the activities that you need to produce that achievement, rather than like, oh man, I have this huge obligation to achieve this thing and I'm not sure I can do it, right? So those are just some examples of thought patterns that can kind of aggravate your stress response. And taking a step back and examining your thought patterns is easier when you implement mindfulness and meditation, because it gives you that moment when you get triggered to say, oh, wait a minute, I'm not sure I need to go down that road. So, I hope this gives you some sense of ways that you can engage in a different way when you find yourself facing that stress or anxiety. It's going to happen, right? There's all kinds of stuff in our world we can't control. But by you showing up differently, by thinking about your thoughts, your feelings, and the actions that you're taking, you really can interrupt that stress response when it's not serving you and show up in a different way. And for me, that's been a huge key in breaking out of this cycle, right? If you're feeling stuck as a change agent, there's a really good chance that your stress response, which is really fear in a sense, is at the heart of this cycle that is getting in the way of your joy and your impact. And so getting back into this idea that, hey, let me focus on the things I can control, which are my thoughts, my feelings, and my actions. And putting my emphasis there is a great way to break out of that stress response and Give yourself more joy and more impact. If you like this video and you want to access the worksheet or any other material that goes with it, just click the link below or head on over to joyfulimpact.co. That's the website where we have all the material we use for working with coaching and personal development for change agents. You can set up a free account in the members area, and you can also check out the blog where we have new content coming out all the time. Why are we putting all this out there for free? Because the world has never been more in need of a new greatest generation of change agents. I hope this material is helpful to you, and if it is, please like the video, subscribe to the channel. That will help us spread the word.